SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
In just 1 month's time, 2024's big summer of sport will kick off with the start of this year's UEFA Euro Championship. 24 teams from across Europe will compete to become the continental champion in the second most viewed football tournament after the World Cup. This, of course, comes with some big opportunities for stakeholders, least among them betting companies. On today's episode of iGaming Daily, I'm joined by Optimove's Jonathan Inbar, Director of Strategic Services, and Jon Collins, Strategic Services Team Leader, to discuss customer engagement during this summer of sport. All of our viewers will obviously be familiar with Optimove as the presenting partner of iGaming Daily. Optimove is the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalised player experiences with Optimove. And as part of a special offer, Optimove are offering new clients a free first month when they buy Optimove. For more information and to claim the free month, go to optimove.com/SBC. Links will also be left in the podcast episode description. So, Jonathan and Jon, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today about what is going to be quite as I said, a really big summer of sport. I guess just to get the ball rolling a bit, who are you guys going to be supporting in the Euros, and have you got any predictions for how the tournament's going to pan out? Jonathan, do you want to be honest first?
Sure. I'm more of a basketball person, actually, but I will go with a safe choice of England. Okay,
fair enough. As an England supporter, I think I'm leaning. I've been trained over the years to be too cautious. I think I'll be confident at a respectable semi-final position. Jon, how about you? What do you reckon?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us on. And I think I'm actually, as an English person, I'm obviously hoping England do well, but it's also my brother's wedding on the final, so I would really like it if we were not in that at that game, so I didn't have to keep sneaking out of the proceedings. Ultimately, I think it's hard to look past France for the Euros this summer.
Yeah, their team's just incredibly strong, isn't it? It's been very consistent in recent years. It's really hard to rule them out. So I guess now that we've got that out of the way, moving on to sort of the more the business end of things, I guess. So as I said, this is obviously a huge tournament. It's arguably the second biggest football tournament in the world after the World Cup. So Jonathan, I was just wondering if you could give us your viewpoint on how much of an opportunity do mega tournaments like this pose for customer acquisition for operators?
Sure. So these so-called mega tournaments, like the Euros, really offer a tremendous opportunity for customer acquisition. So these events generate, what we see is that they generate a surge in interest and participation, and they're attracting both, those seasoned bettors and also new bettors. So for instance, during the Euro of 2020, there was like 150% increase in first-time depositors from some benchmark research that we did, and operators can really capitalize on this by launching targeted promotions and different bonuses, and really leverage the excitement around the tournament to convert new fans into becoming active bettors. And
so you've just mentioned targeting and converting people to active bettors. I remember these were a lot of talking points around the 2022 World Cup. Particularly given sort of the funny timing of that tournament in December compared to usually taking place in the summer. So, Jon, I was just wondering if you could give us some comments on what lessons do you think operators could factor in from that World Cup when crafting strategies around the Euros this summer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you mentioned, the last World Cup was, and as indeed was the previous Euros, were actually really unusual given the circumstances of first COVID and with the timing of the tournament and the fact that it was in Qatar and such sort of strange circumstances. But there are a few things which we know hold firm in usual and unusual circumstances. The first one that I think operators should be aware of is going to be about building our calendar here. So, we know that the sort of casual player base that are going to be betting on these tournaments, they're going to be betting on their own national team at a rate 40% higher than other teams. So that means we really need to re-anchor our marketing plan and our messaging around those national team games. Also means we really have to plan out our communications carefully to make sure that we're not having any kind of messaging clash or orchestration failings with those games. The second part I think that's really important and always shines through in these tournaments is segmentation. So, as well as making sure that we're taking advantage of the activity that can sort of be drawn by these tournaments, we actually have an opportunity to change player behavior as well. So we need to make sure that we're trying to incentivize more valuable activity where possible. So to give you an example of this, users who don't bet on mobile or haven't done a mobile app, we can gate some of our generosity behind placing that kind of activity in order to eventually drive a more valuable player.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting points, to be fair, Jon. And I like how when you started your answer there, you mentioned about the sort of like Euro 2021 as well. And I forget that we had that. There was no real break, was there? Usually we have like a year break between these tournaments. So that was it was quite successive with sort of quickly moving on from one to the other, really, in terms of that year. I was just wondering if we can kind of just expand on this a little bit more with, are there any observations you made during the World Cup that you think will ring true again in the Euros? I know you mentioned sort of like patriotism and things like that, and how that impacts sort of player segmentation. Are you expecting this to be like to repeat itself quite literally again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a few things I'd expect to see this year. The first is that England will disappoint as usual. You could probably get away with some very attractive rates on England winning the whole thing. Aside from this one, as you mentioned, I think the proclivity to bet on one's national team is absolutely going to be present here, and this is something that we normally talk about with these large tournaments is the teams that didn't make it, right? What do you do in those countries? That's really not the case this time around. All of the big players have kind of made it in for once, and it makes planning for your national team as the core of your marketing plan really, really, really simple to do. So that's really good. I think a couple of other things that we can sort of observe and predict going forward is, first of all, retention. So as you mentioned, after Qatar, there were 3-4 weeks before the retention of domestic football in most leagues. And it's a little bit longer, usually wrapping up a summer tournament. So we are looking at sort of 5-6 weeks for the early starts, for the most, unless your team is playing in the Europa or Conference League and has to start in, July 7th in Kazakhstan or somewhere. Generally speaking, there is quite a long lead time, and filling that activity, is going to be key to presenting churn. That's what we can talk about, a bit more detail later, I'm sure. But, the other thing I like to tell operators to think about is, and it's really hard to prepare for, but this always happens, is there's always going to be a storyline team. There's always this groundswell of support that kind of cuts across the national team phenomenon, that gives you an opportunity to kind of double dip on the opportunity when it exists. So I'll give you an example of this where, I think it was the last Euros where, Christian Eriksen unfortunately had a heart attack on the pitch. And following this, Denmark became this sort of fairy tale kind of underdog team that attracted this huge swell of interest from more casual bettors. And it kind of did help matter. So they went deep into the tournament. But when you think about it, this means if you're a country that doesn't particularly have a strong national team, or maybe you are a national team that goes out early in the group stages as a surprise, you're able to try and leverage the storyline team as that sort of replacement anchor for your marketing plan, and you can kind of ride that wave, hopefully.
And now, Jonathan, if we can just follow on from Jon's comments there. Obviously, we've talked a lot about how these tournaments have all just sort of followed each other quite successively, and and how customers stay engaged with all that. So during the Euros, that, as I said, start in a month's time, how can operators effectively combine reactivating players from previous tournaments whilst engaging some of the new audiences that are going to be coming through?
So in terms of reactivating more dormant customers, what we see that is usually happening is that our operators are using special promotions that are tailored to the past behavior of these players, in order to kind of like rekindle their engagement. And they're doing it by being able to really look at who was active during previous tournaments, like the previous World Cup or the Euro before that, and kind of build some segmentation model around it that tells them who has more likelihood to really reactivate. And from that, it can go also to sport bettors that usually their preferred sport category is soccer versus other type of categories like horse racing or tennis, for example. Now, this is about reactivating lapsed or dormant customers, but simultaneously engaging new audiences. This can be done with more attractive and kind of customized welcome bonuses and educational content on betting, and this can help them convert them into new and active bettors. What we see that is mostly happening is as some sort of gamification strategies. So, for example, betting challenges, right? That is tied to the national team preference, and this can really further enhance participation. And during the previous Euro, we saw several clients of ours that saw significant success using this approach that led to over 120% increase in their total deposit amount throughout the tournament.
So, we've mentioned quite a few things here so far throughout this conversation, like patriotism has come up quite a bit. Jonathan, you obviously just mentioned gamification and bonuses and all these sort of elements that have clearly had quite a big impact on a lot of operators. Now, Jon, sorry, I feel like I keep on almost asking you to look into a crystal ball here with regards to the tournament, but so with all these methods that are at the disposal, what are your sort of main predictions for the tournament from a marketing perspective? What are you expecting to see operators use most in their toolkits, I guess?
Well, yeah. So I think there are a number of things that they need to account for. The most, I guess, foremost amongst these things is that we're going to be seeing a very large, more casual player base, and when you're dealing with that kind of player, I think you need to steer away from over generosity, at least that's not gated behind things. So Jonathan just mentioned gamification. I really recommend employing gamification as much as possible during this tournament. Where if that isn't possible, and we do speak to operators that don't have capacity the capability, I should say, to really do that. What I think we'll be seeing is a lot more bet and get type offers being employed, at least for these new and reactivated users. And those more valuable, sort of free cash type of offers being employed more at the high end of the active players, the VIPs, people who have already demonstrated value to the brand. The other thing I think that operators will be really leaning into this time is certainly live betting. Since the last Euro, certainly we've seen an explosion in the proportion of overall bets being placed in a live sense. And I think this is really going to be important for brands to take account of when they're building out their marketing plans.
If I could just add something to what Jon said, we need to remember that comparing the Euros to let's say the World Cup, we're going to have a much more refined pool of countries. And what we will probably see, as opposed to the World Cup, where we have much more people with national teams and preference, so it's much more easier to do gamification based on your where you live. Now we'll have another kind of type of segment of bettors that is cheering for, maybe more strategic or very popular countries, but they come from Latin America, other parts of the world that really loves football, but doesn't really have a national team that is participating during this tournament.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting factor to consider, actually, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's something we can never really underestimate. Sort of the international power and status of football, really, can you, as a sport, and the international pull that it has. So kind of, we've looked at obviously lots of different things, had lots of different discussions during this chat here, looking at a lot of the stuff that operators will be doing. I was just wondering if I can now focus in a bit on some of the stuff that Optimove is actually doing. I know you've got this really interesting tool, iGaming Pulse. Jonathan, I was just wondering if you can give me a breakdown of that, like how can marketers use it and how can they benefit from it?
Sure. So let me start with the vision first of why we created this tool. We wanted to be able to really share from our knowledge, from our kind of like skills as a company, swimming with data and insights. We wanted to be able to share that with operators that are either clients of ours or not. But to give them access to really good benchmark statistics for their market. So if you go into the tool, you'll see many different KPIs around migrations, like retention rates and reactivation rates and so on. And also like different monetary KPIs, like average deposit amounts and bet amounts and so on. And you can filter that by different market. And basically what we see, where we see, different clients of ours and other operators out there that value from this is that they can take their KPIs, their statistics, compare it to how the market is performing, and see where are their weak spots, where are they good at, and based on that, decide, okay, this is where we need to put our efforts, our marketing efforts now, in order to basically reach this goal of becoming the same as the market benchmark, or even over the market benchmark.
Okay, that's really cool. Thank you, Jonathan. That's very, very thorough breakdown of quite an interesting tool, I think, especially in the context of what we've been talking about here, of such a multi-dynamic tournament that we've got coming up. Jonathan and Jon, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. This has been a really interesting conversation about, like I said, what is going to be a really exciting tournament for both customers and the companies involved. And thanks to all our listeners who tuned in, and please stay tuned in for another episode where I'll be speaking to Optimove even more about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.